So now I will, so I'm not the moderator here, although I was appointed to give these few words. I will be one of the panelists here. We will not have a formal moderation. The idea is that you guys also intervene and make your questions, and let's try to do this in two ways, not in just one way. But first we will have a presentation about NESOI, then we will have a presentation about how to finance decarbonization on islands, and then a presentation about what we have done in the previous contract and how we will do it in the future. But basically all the presentations will be talking about the future and opportunities. But so I would like to hand it to you. Yeah.
Thank you. Okay, so good afternoon, everyone. We will start with the presentation. So we're already changing the program, starting from NESOI. Maybe some of you is already familiar with the facility. NESOI is the European Island Facility supporting European island in their path towards decarbonization. So we're basically providing them with technical assistance. And we are managing the facility with 6 million euro of resources, which were allocated on islands through 2 open calls. Okay, thank you. Okay. So these are the NESOI islands, so the beneficiaries of our facility. As I mentioned, the 6 million euro of resources were allocated directly on islands. So basically what we did was making 2 calls, and we received more than 117 applications, and we selected 54 projects involving 63 islands. Also archipelagos were involved. So we allocated basically all the budget to these projects. As you can see from the map, projects came from all Europe. So we have projects coming from the south, from Greece, from Italy, Croatia, project coming from the north. So we have a wide variety actually of different territories and different needs. Some of them are also big islands, large islands. Some others are small islands with totally different needs. So there is really a variety and complexity in these projects. Also, they are different because some of them are energy planning, for example. Others are feasibility studies, and we also have due diligence. But the fil rouge in all these technical assistance that we provided is the economic and financial aspects of the assistance, because the projects needs to be actually realized, implemented. So we looked for the financing aspect since the beginning of the project and of our support. So basically what we found out in these projects is that a discrepancies is there among financial needs and funding available. That's the big point. As you can see here, this represents our projects. We have already a good share of funds available or secured in large islands projects, even if some work is still needed there. But what is very evident is that in small islands the situation is totally different. They have, of course, more barriers. So these discrepancies is huge, basically. So the technical assistance is needed, in particular in this kind of context, to try at least to bridge this gap between finance and the projects. And indeed, at this moment in time, we try to understand why these discrepancies are there. So why the projects and the finance cannot meet. And what we thought actually at the beginning of the project, and this is the reason why NESOI was, let's say, created, is that the issue was on the project side. So the fact is that projects, islands, promoters, private promoters as well, needs some kind of support to structure the project in the right way, in a sustainable way to get the finance. And this was basically confirmed also from the fact that we received so many applications, and also in a very limited time. So this was a very, very good result also. But that we understood that the issue is not only on the project side, but also on the financial side. So let me, okay, go ahead with the slides. In this specific moment, I think we have a lot of resources. We were discussing this also during the morning. There are a lot of resources available. but they are not the right resources. Or maybe there are some barriers and criticalities which prevent projects to obtaining these kind of resources. So as you can see here, in the graph, the blue bars represents the funds that we have mapped, for example, on the structural funds. Is just an example from our projects. And you can see that only a very small share of these funds is actually eligible, meaning coherent with the projects. So, okay, finance is there, but it's not the right one, or in any case, is structured somehow or in a different way, so projects cannot actually apply and have the grants or access the resources because there are restrictions in terms of beneficiaries, in terms of size, for example, of the investment required. And also what we understood is that islands are somehow also answering this question, and private finance is, for example, becoming a new let's say tool, a new resource also for the islands. And many projects are indeed local driven, so we have the energy community there which is actually pushing for investments. Some projects, for example, could also get a loan, so access the bank financing. But of course, every project is different. Every island has its needs. So the technical assistance again is key to bridge this gap between resources and between the projects. These are only some examples of our projects. Maybe we can discuss about this later. Thank you. So let me just mention some of them. We supported the Port Authority in Messina in Italy in a project which is actually a very early stage project because they were developing their CETA, basically, is specifically for the Port Authority, is mandatory in Italy. And basically, even if this is like a planning document, they already have some funds. So they could apply actually for an Italian grant for the cold irony technology. So they already secured part of the financing. And this is very interesting. In other cases, for example, in Crete, we developed some feasibility studies that could actually, they were supporting the locals, in particular the energy community there, to apply for a national grant, and they obtained the grant, so they are renovating all the sports complexes. So just to mention the fact that sometimes we need to set a dialogue between the projects and the funding institutions, and this dialogue is fundamental to have actually the projects implemented. So I leave the floor again to you as moderator.
Thank you, thank you. So we'll just pass the microphone.
Oh yeah, please. Hi. I'm Amandine. I'm new in this island context. I work for a Canadian company, which is, I know, quite strange to be focused on EU, but we work a lot with SEEDs, what is called SEED, small island development, and mainly in the Pacific and the Caribbean. And we think that some of the lessons learned and key takeaways that we learn from financing mechanism and how to finance decarbonization of this island can be taken to the European island, and we hope that we can bring some insights. So I'd like to talk to you about how to finance decarbonization in generally and of island specifically. So just to let you know that it exists a wide variety of financing instruments, and that depends mainly to the market maturity where you are. So it starts with grants that I know in Europe are very, very used a lot, much more than in other contexts, which they have less money. So it's very strange, and we have to see to analyze why in Europe there are so much reliance on grants, and in Africa, Asia, or Latin America, there is less grant and still projects are implemented. So it's very interesting. And it starts with a low market maturity. And if you see, there's different types of funding going up to the leveraged commercial financing, for example, through energy services company. I will talk a little bit more in detail about this. That are really for more high maturity in the market. And it's include public financing and commercial financing. And all this financing can be used for financing decarbonization in islands. So just here to show you that there is not only public sector instrument, but also market-based instruments that can be used to fund decarbonization projects. So worldwide, a lot of utility programs are used. In Europe, it's mainly related to white certificate or energy efficiency certificate. In France, it exists. In Italy also. So it's related to the utility programs that can be used to finance this project. I don't know if it has been done in the past phases, but we can, of course, try to see this for the next phases. Of course, governmental program or EU-funded program or any like regional program. Some fiscal instruments that are widely used also in Europe that are very interesting, and you have to take this into account when you do your financing analysis. And of course, any grant, incentive and subsidy that can be found, which is always a good point, but you should not rely on when you plan your project. And then we have the market-based instrument. And maybe it's something that's like a little bit of knowledge in the field. From what I've heard this morning, maybe I'm wrong, sorry for this, but it's a lot of public sector instrument. And I think sincerely market-based instruments are well tailored to fund some decarbonization project in Ireland. So of course you have loan, but you have leasing, which is widely used in the renewable energy and energy efficiency field. You have bonds, which is increasingly, it's huge and it's coming really big, especially in the sustainability and also what is called the blue bonds in the water, so you can link water and energy. Of course, any kind of public-private financing, including all this, what we call the community cooperative. It doesn't need to be a big private. It can be several small private. And energy performance contract, I will go more into detail. And any specialized funds, there is, for instance, a fund in Europe called Energy Efficiency Fund. There is many funds related to sustainability and energy efficiency, renewable energies that can be a good entry point for this project to be funded. So one thing that shows this slide, it's today, for project, you have a certain type of available financing mechanism or financing institution that can provide you. But currently, many development are going on to the decarbonization funding of climate. It's called the climate financing. And many new mechanisms will come within the 5 to 10 years. So bonds, a lot of bonds are created. A lot of new funds, like many new financing will be available, and we need to take this into account when you think of a decarbonization project, which is in an island or not in an island. But this can be really important within the next year, especially we're talking in 7 years to be 100% renewable. You can take some of this, especially bonds, into account when we do when we look for financing this decarbonization project. So I wanted to go a little bit more into detail because I'm an energy efficiency expert. So what mainly we do, because it's a little bit more complicated than renewable energy, we do financing system, business model, and financing mechanism for energy efficiency. So the most known and the most used worldwide, it's called energy performance contracting. It's a contract that is mainly repaid by energy savings. It's widely used, very known in Europe, and it can be applied to any decarbonization renewable energy also project in an island. So the main thing that, the most important thing that you have to take into account is that one company, it's called the energy service company, will integrate the different components that you need to intervene, that you need to interact with when you are a client, meaning the contractor, the engineers, the energy supplier, the financing institution, manufacturers, so on, so on, so on. What the ESCO will do, they will be like, it's Europe, I know it's one-stop shop almost. And it is the understanding of the client, it is the development of it, and it's then repaid through an energy performance contracting, which guarantees the energy savings. So it's repaid by itself using the energy saving. It's a very common, widely used worldwide. It's widely used in Europe, and I'm sure it can be used for energy projects, especially the one that take into account both renewable energy and energy efficiency at the same time, which can be applied to a small island or big island. And the last thing I wanted to talk to you, it's exactly what Alessandra was saying. What is missing? What do they miss? It's like this decision process. It might be a little bit complicated for people that are not in the field of financing or in the field of energy day to day, and especially for small island when there's a lack of capacity. So what it is important to understand is when you have a project, you do different analysis, so an operational analysis, a financing analysis, and a strategy analysis. And then it's what you present to your potential investors. And the investor does not only need the operational data that you will get from an engineer, which are very important, but also the cash flow analysis, the benefit stream, capital expenses, and many other parameters from a financial point of view, but also a business case, a business plan really. And then it will go through different processes and it will be analyzed. Some project will fail because it's live and it's like this, and maybe the context is not adapted, maybe stakeholders are not the best one, maybe the energy price is not enough high now, it will become, but now it's not enough. But when the project goes through all this and it's a go for each one, it go to, and it can even receive a lot of like private financing, not only public. So it can convince fully the private to finance this project because they are profitable. That was mainly. I think if anybody has a question, we can take it from now or. Yeah.
Okay. Thank you so much. Thank you. So now it's my turn as a speaker. So I would like to give you an overview of what we have done in the previous phase of the secretariat and how we supported some islands. I have two examples, but before speaking of these two examples and show them, just to say that when it comes to finance, we had a lot of requests from islands that have a good project, or they think that they have a good project. So, and they ask us, please check this project, see whether it's a good project and whether it's a project that can be that we can get the money. So the word for that we use in this industry is bankable, so means that it's a project that can be financed through a private investor and using one of the models that were presented here. But also this is relevant for grants, because even if you are going to get a small portion or a big portion of the grants to pay for your project, the type of analysis that we do is the same. If it's good for a private investor, I'm pretty sure that will be good for the grants and also will help you to get the grant, because you will have a better business plan or a better pitch to present about your project. So just to give two examples of projects that we supported. For instance, Lampedusa in Italy, they were thinking about implementations of two PV plants, which itself it's not complicated in technical terms. PV power plants, it's being planted everywhere at the moment, so we see them growing. In this case, there were some constraints about the selection of the place where they were going to build them, so there were some regulatory issues on it, but our role was to check the financial model of it based on the data of the project. So they knew exactly the technology and the power that they will implement, and they asked us to support them on cash flows, net present value, so those types of indicators that are the indicators that an investor would expect, and also to provide them with different scenarios so that they could understand, because if the project does not go ahead exactly like we were expecting, we need to simulate or try to see different scenarios that could happen and see whether it's still manageable, the risk on it. And so at the end, what we provided was this type of analysis. Doesn't matter the figures that are there, just for you to understand that we provided a full pack, a full report with all the data that they needed about the costs, reinvestment costs, maintenance costs, and tax, for instance, if there are some benefits should be put it on these models so that they know when they are doing the calculations and deciding whether they will go for a grant or they will go for a private investor, so they need to check that. Another example, a little bit different from Porto Santo in Portugal. So they were thinking about waste to energy from the biomass part of the waste, and then using a specific project and to deliver at the end hydrogen. So this is very different because on the previous project they were it's more or less standard. So PV power plants, it's more or less standard. We have a lot of data. We have, for instance, when it comes to analysis of the risks, there are many tools that help you doing that. But when it comes to waste to energy or waste to hydrogen in this case, so it's something new, there are not so many tools. And they were asking us exactly to do that. First, find if there is funding available, and financing. When I say funding, it's grants. Financing, it's private investors investing on it. So we checked the different kind of solutions that were available for Portugal, at European level, at this case, and helping them to find the right one and see whether they were eligible or not. As presented here, not all of them were eligible because different reasons, but we highlighted all of those. Also, they asked us to give some guidance how to apply for the grants, how to apply for the funding. So we provide them some guidance, and we also did a kind of workshop with them, very practical, to see how they should be doing this. Because there is in this specific project, there was a level of innovation, and for that there is this need of applying for these grants. And also, but here it's very relevant, and I like to stress this part, a risk assessment. So we tried to, together with them, identify what are the key risks, because that's exactly what an investor will do. An investor will think about what are the key risks of this project and decided whether he can support those risks or not. If he can support, he will probably invest on it. If he cannot support, he will not invest. For that, we cover different risks, from the risk related with the company itself, regulatory risks, so energy price, feedstock, those kinds of things. So we put it on the table. We did not find a specific value for all the risks with them, because some of them, they were still working on it, but at least we highlight them that you need to think about this before presenting your project to someone else, because this will be asked for you for sure. So those are the types of things that we provide to them. And so this is very, very relevant, because in one hand, this risk analysis, when it comes to private financing, and when it comes to innovation projects, this is key, and also for the grants. So because doing this analysis, they will have to find ways of overcoming those risks, and this will making sure that their project will be better at the end. As a final sentence, I would like to stress that developing a strategy for 100% renewable or decarbonization, whatever name that we give them, needs a big financial part of it. So you need to think about how you will finance these projects, because in some cases can be just one windmill that will supply all the energy, so that will not be very, very complex, but in other cases it will be complex because it will include energy efficiency, it will include renewables, it will include industry, it will include transport sector. So different sectors, they have different needs. So for those, you need to think about how you will finance these, whether it's a public money available or not, and how you build a business model that the private investor can invest on it. And for that, I will also like to recommend you to visit our financial corner at the website of the Clean Energy for You Islands, that you will find more information. All the previous projects are there. Also, you can check there, you can download the reports whenever it was open. In some cases, there were proprietary data and stuff like that. So we have a fact sheet about the project, but not all the details. But most of them, we have all the details you can download, you can see, and you will see that we are not reinventing the wheel. We are just putting together all that is available. And that's exactly what we try to do in the near future, help the islands in this process. And now this was my last slide. I would like to hand up to you for questions that you might have, opinions that you might have, or views completely different from the views that we have presented are also welcome, and we are here just for that discussion. Okay, just to save time, I will give this microphone. You are not slow, the room is too big.
Okay. You can go first, thank you. Hi, my name is Sarah from the Secretariat, so I'm representing the Secretariat with my question, already thinking about the work that we have ahead in supporting the islands with financing and with finding their way to financing. Now, my question was related to the timing of when this analysis should be looked into, because I heard that it's important that a project is structured in a certain way before you go to an investor. So that sounds like there are elements to be taken into account from the very beginning, and we will have different situations. We will have islands with mature projects who are ready for implementation. So that's the last phase. We will have islands with technological ideas in the beginning, but not yet thinking about financing, more about how to elaborate the technology aspect. How would you think about guiding them through the phase of getting the right financing when you have those different situations? That's my question.
Thank you, Sarah. I think it goes through capacity building, because the people can learn. And of course, some people are knowledgeable in technology-wise, some people are project managers, some people are financing people, some people are just like community like organizer, manager. And I think we can give them the tools, like really the tools in terms of capacity building and templates, and explaining them how to develop a pitch, how to develop a business model that is suited for looking for investment, both private or public, knowing that, Jorge mentioned, it's the same data that are needed for any investment that you need. It's not that you need some data for a grant or some other data for a private funding. So I think we can stress on this, work on this really heavily, and do some workshop to show the people what are the steps to do, how they do it, and then give them the tools to develop it, and hopefully try to push them as much as we can, because we are in 2023 and it is for 2030 to be 100% in implementation. And I already stressed at the Secretariat that I know that some islands are more or less ready, it's fully clear, but it's really the time to think on implementation and try to push as much as possible. Some project takes a lot more time because they need community involvement, and they are not like a big thing on the water, and it's with the people. So it takes time to involve the people, but still the people will know how to do it after. That's important. Even when we left, the webpage will still here, all this data will be here, and we can do really a nice capacity building to let them having the tools and the information to then be able to go to look for investors themselves.
Okay. Yes, I will complement actually the answer with the point of view of the NESOI facility. So what we did with some of our projects. So to answer your question, what is necessary actually to start looking for finance, or at least for the model, my suggestion is as soon as possible. I mean, it depends also on the maturity of the projects. So for example, I mentioned a project which is a planning document, so they are in a very early stage. But however, already thinking about the funding opportunities, it was key actually, because at the end, it was one of the projects that actually had the funding, even if it is a planning in the maturity level. So this is fundamental. Also, it will be key to understand if a project needs a funding, for example, in terms of grant resources. So if the business model is also aligned with this kind of resources, or if it can also access different kind of financing, so private finance. And you can learn this along the way, let's say. So in the meantime that you develop the project, you can already get some insights. And this is on the project level. Then we have the financial level, so the dialogue with the financial institutions, for example, which is already something that we are doing. So we are, especially in the last phase of the projects, we call it the roadshow. So we are meeting with many investors, private but also public, for example. And what we got is that sometimes they have resources, but they doesn't know actually how to invest the resources. So when you bring the projects, they are super happy. So you need to make this meet. There are kind of two perspectives, but they need to converge. So for this reason, my answer to start as soon as possible to think about this.
Okay. So yeah, just to say the same thing, as soon as possible. And also, it's important to state that depending on the maturity of the project, you can access to different funding or financing opportunities. Because for development stage, there are grants that can support you on that. For instance, this project developer assistance that supports you on developing a specific project, but they don't finance the implementation phase. For that, there are other opportunities like structural funds or energy service companies or power purchase agreements, so different models that can help you on the implementation. But then you probably need refinance of the project because you will have to reinvest, or there are other financial aspects that could happen. There could be a reselling of the project, so those kinds of things. And there are other opportunities like the bonds or other types of or source of money that can be available. So depending also on the maturity of the project, there are different opportunities that you can get. So that's why it's important to know where you are, know what you want to do, and start thinking about where you want to reach and what type of funding is available for that. Because this also depends on the investor. There are investors that like to have projects on an early stage, not too early because they will not have to spend 5 years thinking of a specific project, but where they can shape a little bit the project, you know. And there are others that like to go at the end. For instance, banks, we usually like to go at the end. You have the project ready, you know the cash flow, you know everything, and they will give you a loan. But private investors, some funds like to go a bit early to understand the contracts, to try to shape the contracts. So as soon as possible, and depends on the project.
We have been discussing on projects and financing, and I believe the idea is we think of a specific project with specific revenues. However, we are all familiar that in islands it is very often the case that you don't have a specific project, but you have a complex of projects. You have a set of actions of sub-projects, let's say, which can be quite different. Well, you can have, for example, PV generation, which is a mature, let's say, business case, and you can have a more innovative, let's say, hydrogen. So these different sub-projects have different parameters. So when we go into the financing institutions, we would need to fit our ideas into a specific box. So what do we do with these complex projects? And I'm also referring to the taxonomy regulation, because taxonomy is looking in the boxes, not in the overall. So have we thought, and I'm referring to the Commission or NESOI, have we thought of actually proposing to the Commission of including into the taxonomy regulation a case of a separate category of islands, so that it would support this, let's say, complex project, so that we don't have to break it into pieces?
Yes, actually, we had some experiences with these kind of complex projects, and actually, these projects were on small islands, so even more difficult because the scale is very limited. So again, when looking for financing, you have some difficulties because the scale of the investment is too small sometimes. So what we are doing is trying to collect all these evidences that we got from the island in a paper. So we're going to publish this and to share this also with the European Commission, trying to suggest, of course, different instruments that could be specifically be addressed to this kind of needs, because are very, of course, very peculiar. But as you mentioned, in bigger projects, when also the different interventions may have the proper scale to be funded themselves, we're trying to create the boxes that you mentioned. That's basically the only way. Sometimes there are programs which are actually a bit more comprehensive, let's say. So when projects, even if are different technologies but are somehow linked, there are funds also at European level that can deal with these kind of projects, but again, only for very big investments. So we need to find a balance. And that's probably why also in our analysis, in our experience, we found a very big gap in between the resources and the projects.
Okay, so yeah, taxonomy was one of the questions that we had to answer on the previous support, because that was, if they did not ask us, we would support them and say, okay, guys, you have to fulfill this requirement because this is regulatory. And taxonomy, for who is not so familiar with, so it's the EU taxonomy for sustainable finance. So that means that if you go for a grant, if you apply for a grant on structural funds, or if you go to a bank for a loan, you will have to fulfill certain declarations about the type of investments that you are doing in order to be categorized as sustainable or not sustainable. And the taxonomy says what is sustainable and what is not. This is not so simple because there are gray areas, but let's try to put it in a simple way. So whether it's you go for a loan for real estate for your new house, it's of energy efficiency class, so it's under the taxonomy as sustainable. It goes to this part of the investment of the bank. If it's not, it goes to this part. And there are certain levels of investment that the bank can do, for instance, in terms of outside of the taxonomy. So that's why they will push for your investment to be part of the taxonomy. When it comes to grants, structural funds, they will only finance under the taxonomy. So there are declarations that you will start signing that they do no significant harm, and other types of declarations that are part of the funding now. So you will have to show that you are doing an investment that is aligned with the taxonomy. So those are the rules. For instance, everything that comes through European Investment Bank must follow the taxonomy. So even if you apply for a local bank that has a credit line from European Investment Bank, you'll have to follow the taxonomy. So taxonomy is there, we have to fulfill that. Answering to your question about the specific point for the islands, this is Jorge, not the Secretariat speaking, okay? I see that with a lot of difficulty. It will not be easy to be done. I'm personally not against to, but I see a lot of issues there, because then there will be a lot of exceptions. Small inland but small village, they also need this type of approach because they are not different from an island. And then if you start pushing, everything will be an exception. So that's why it's project-based and not where the project is based, the taxonomy. So taxonomy is requirements on the project. As if it's waste to energy, must fulfill these emissions at limit. If you fulfill this requirement, this and that, it's under taxonomy. If you don't fulfill, it's outside. So it's very technical and focus on that.
Regarding the different maturity, technology maturity of different projects, it's very, very interesting. And the thing we do, it's blended finance. We have this overall planning project, everything different activities or action to go for the island to be full decarbonized or 100% renewable. And you find different financing option, financing mechanism, and you adapt and you switch and you create a puzzle that fit for the island. This is the work, this is how we do it. And some will go with grants, and it's already happening with small projects. You have a part of grant, a part of private, a part of structural fund. So, it's already happening, and it's just the same thing with different activity. So you have it in one project, you just do it for different. It's not easy, and it's not straightforward, but it's already done, and it's very good. First there. Anna? Sorry. It's marathon.
It's all about the steps,
Yeah. Up and down.
Thank you. You definitely make this 10,000 steps a day today. My name is Put, European Youth Energy Network, and I have a question regarding the wholesale electricity market reform and your opinion about it. What do I mean by that? So basically, when it comes to islands, obviously. So obviously, we know that one of the main proposals is to actually support the PPA, so power purchase agreements, obviously, and they will be actually these are proposals, so they might be state-backed in order to lower price instability. And I would like to know your opinion about this view of this proposal of the energy islands, because one of the reasons, from what I know, that this proposal just came forward a bit was the fact that basically the bigger can do bigger things, and some islands are not that big to actually go into the PPA. And I would like to know your opinion about it. Thank you so much.
Yeah.
So I'm not an expert on the market on that point, but I do agree with one thing. If you go for project finance, usually an investor will ask for €5 million project. If you have a $500,000 project, an investor will not invest in you. A private investor will be hard for you to get an investment there. If it's a one shot only, if you say, okay, I will have 20 $500,000 projects, that's a different story. But at the end of the day, in that case, you are getting a big project at 10 million. But if you only have a small project, it's not interesting. And when it comes to a PPA, although it seems simple, so you install, you inject in the grid, so I buy, we have a contract, this is quite simple. In practical terms, it's not so simple. There are processes that need to be done that are expensive. For instance, the legal contract between the parties is quite expensive. So there are these costs. Usually, it's easy to put in a big project but it's hard to put in a small project. That's why when you design a small project, you don't go for a PPA as itself, because you try to avoid this. You try to go for an energy community where if there is a regulation that allow you to do that, or self-consumption, try to make it simpler, the best, in order to avoid all these extra costs that you have to put on those transaction costs that you need to put on the process. That's why if you push for certain things like PPAs, you are pushing for bigger projects and not for smaller projects, because although it's sometimes you use the same terminology saying that we have a PPA, but it's not a PPA, we have an agreement between two parties. It's a bit different. If you follow the PPA exactly, can be expensive, can be this transaction costs. That's why probably it's like that. But I'm not an expert on the market. My colleagues from our colleagues from Finki, they are doing that research. They can probably answer better than I. I don't know if you have something to add.
No, basically we have no experience, at least in NESOI, with PPAs. We are dealing with this in other activities as Sinloc, and actually I totally agree with what Jorge said. I mean, the issue is that it can be feasible on large-scale projects or however under certain conditions, and you need to take into consideration, of course, the costs. But let's see.
State-backed. The mic.
Yeah,
the mic,
sure. So I was referring to the projects being state-backed. So basically, normally you have kind of like two parties, normally. But here, the proposal is to include it specific guarantees that the state will intervene in case something bad happens. So I was wondering if you know, or if you might forecast like what would be the effect of that, if it would be small, no effect, substantial.
So what the impact of the guarantee of the public government will do, it will be able to decrease the cost of financing, which is very, very good. Meaning that the small projects that have like more transaction cost and usually higher interest rate will be able to decrease its interest rate and be like more bankable and profitable. So it's a very good option. Always having a guarantee or collateral, call it as you want, is a very important aspect of financing a project. We haven't talked in detail about it, but it's key aspect of it. And if it's backed up by the government, the private financer will buy it. So it's a very good thing.
It's my turn. Okay.
It's your turn.
Okay, I have a consideration about something that was very interesting. Alessandra pointed out that is the mismatch between projects and allocating funds. So we have ambitious projects, but sometimes the available funds are not. It is not possible to fund through those instruments those projects. And your first slide, I paid attention to Amandine's first slide. That was very interesting terms. So the question is for you. Okay, you're pairing the different funding and financing instruments according to the different level of maturity of the projects.
On the market, which is not the same.
Of the market.
Yeah.
Okay, now we'll explain. I will just ask you something that you were mentioning but was not specified in the last, actually in the first line of your slide, where there is low maturity, so there is bigger presence of public funds. And you say, or it was written over there, that it distorts the market, okay? Maybe a bit extreme, I don't know. Should be better explained this point, and how we can balance that with the necessity of public funds, because even if it may distort the market, but we have a necessity. And also another very quick comment about the ESCO's operations. Definitely, I think that it is the future, especially for small-scale interventions, because ESCOs needs funds to cover these interventions. So unless we are talking about the big ESCOs companies that are kinds of spin-offs from big utilities, and so they have the capacity to cover big energy investments, but in islands they are very often small-scale investments, and the ESCOs operations have some constraints in terms of regulations in different, for example, EU markets, because there's no uniform or one way they operate. So it depends according to the country. At least in EU, there is still some gap to be filled in this. Like, for example, in energy communities, these are still topics that are not so, let's say, treated in the same way in the same EU market. So this is something which must be still addressed when there are funds available, but the operators that can use these funds are regulated in a different way in each EU country. So, thanks.
So regarding the first question about distortion of market, first of all, the energy market is fully distorted because there is a lot of taxes and things related to energy price. So we talked this morning that in some countries the energy price for the island, it's like leveled with the inland. There is always like grants, and so the market is already disturbed without having a project grant. I mainly work in developing country, not in Europe. So I have the plate that the market are a little bit less disturbed because they don't have so much money in this region. So in this case, we try to avoid grants, and we try to see, based on exactly what is the cost of energy, which kind of project are bankable or not. And especially in energy efficiency, it's quite easy. We calculate the paybacks, NPV and so on, and we see if it's a bankable project or not. We try to avoid grants because what we've seen in our experience, it's when you put a grant, it pushes the market quite big at one moment, but when you stop the grant, the market usually stops. And it's not something that you want. You want a continuity, you want a stability replication in the solution. So, for instance, when you have a program that give a grant for, let's say, an appliance or heat pumps or something like that, when the grant stops, because the program stops, the market drops. So it's something that it disturbs the market in this way. It doesn't mean that grants are useless or not useful, especially for the island and for small-scale projects, because the island has this difficulty. We see this morning, it was very interesting, the barrier, because it was this afternoon, I think Kostas mentioned it. It was lack of capacity, difficulty of supply chain, difficulty. It costs more to go there, so it's normal that they have some grants because additional cost is higher than if you do inland. So, for instance, it's a good thing to have a grant to overcome this issue, but still, it's from if you think from generally point of view, it should be reflected in the energy price that you pay. I mean, electricity or heating or whatever, but it's not so. The market is already disturbed. It answer your question? Okay. And regarding the ESCO market, it should be more developed because I'm an energy efficiency advocate, so I like the ESCO. But of course, it had some high transaction costs. We talk about it. It's very important to have a certain level of energy intensity. This is why it's more used in tertiary public building than in the residential sector. But in an island, as we talk a lot about community, it can be seen as a community and have different building to aggregate. And aggregation is a very powerful tool, not only on renewable, but also in energy efficiency. And you can bring an ESCO. The smallest ESCOs that can do this medium small scale project will look for financing. They will be the integrator of the financing. So it doesn't mean that they do not need help, but they will do exactly what the work you have done. They will look to different doors and to see what kind of financing they can get. And by bundling and by having maybe knowing the technologies, the risks, they might find lowest prices for investments. But of course, it's always a matter of scale. And biggest lower the transaction costs are, and it's exactly the same as PPA. It's the same barrier, same problem, but ESCO can solve a lot of issue related to having a professional knowing different aggregating and integrated different stakeholders, and also guaranteeing the energy saving or guaranteeing the energy production, because it works with renewable energy also, which give a good sign to the clients.
Let me just say something. Just to say something about ESCOs, because I also wear a hat of the Portuguese ESCO Association. I'm part of it. And we debate a lot about the public funding, although I do not have the position such strong as Amandine has it on it. But one thing is clear, that from the Portuguese market relies a lot on structural funds. So a lot of things are made by structural funds. And every time there are politicians come to the TV and says, we will have 200 million for the industry sector. So all the work that the ESCOs are doing stops at that moment. And sometimes we have to wait 1 year to the program be launched, because you know how politicians are. They like to, way in advance, to present several times the same line, and they generate expectation. So everything stops. And sometimes they come to the conclusion that they were not eligible for some reason, that those projects. And so during this year that they did not invest, they could have paid for the investment in a lot of cases. So I'm not against, but we have to be very careful, for instance, when we present the grants or the way that we do it, so that we don't disturb the market. Because for the companies, it's really hard. And even for you as if you own an industry or at your house in the island, wherever, if you know that there is a grant available, you will not do until see whether you can apply for it, because it's money that you can get from there. So we need to be careful on this, okay? I don't know if you want to say something or we move. Okay. Okay.
Okay, if you allow. Thank you. My name is still Kalle. I guess we know now what's the difference of funding and financing. I was wondering a bit what is the capacity building, but I guess it's the capacity of the project managers.
It's easy, It's
yeah,
easy.
That's not really the question.
No, but it's taking by the hand the other entity. Teaching and taking by the hand. Because one thing that I've learned over the years that I'm working on this space is I can send you all the information that I want, but the other side will not be able to use it in the best way. If I take you by the hand, so doing technical assistance, so that will allow you to do the investment. So working together, having debates, conversations, and not just delivering you a report. That's what we try to say when we say technical assistance, is to answer your questions, but working together in a way that you also learn, so that you will be capable of doing next time.
Yeah. Thank you. It's more clear. I was also wondering the capacity of whom. Is it, and I mean, if you run a project, you have the project developers, project managers, then you have the beneficiaries, direct beneficiaries, indirect beneficiaries. So who are we targeting really? But if I try to formulate my question actually, where do you have the individuals, the households, the residents of an island on this landscape? How do they fit in if they want to participate in the renewable schemes or efficiency schemes?
So for what how it is called, it's more for the beneficiary. We call it more awareness raising. We try to explain to them the benefits of the project and how to, like if there is a new technology, how to use it. The capacity building are more for the developer, for the implementer, for the one who will develop the project to understand how to do it and maybe to replicate it. You see the difference? It's clear. Usually for the beneficiary, we explain the benefits of the project, we explain how to use it, but not necessarily how to finance it, how to calculate it, how to make a feasibility study and so on. But we tend to try to teach and take the hand and work together with a developer, with the municipality, with a community manager, with all the people that can develop the project, and explain to them how to do it, how to develop the different, like to get a business model, to different activity, to have a business model, to be able to implement the project, get the funding, get the financing, and then this is different, a little bit different approach for exactly as you said, different stakeholders.
What about the households, individuals?
It's a beneficiary. It's the beneficiary.
Okay. Actually, when it comes to the secretariat, so projects can come from different sources. They must have a public entity involved. They must come from the island as a public authority. That should be a public authority involved. But in many of the cases that at least I personally work with, there were local organizations also involved, whether they were energy agencies or development agencies or citizens, groups of citizens, local associations pro the island that were engaged there. So it depends a bit on the type of technical assistance and support that we are giving, because sometimes it's too technical, so we are not targeting the citizen, the household there, because it's too technical. It's to develop the size of the electrolyzer for the hydrogen system. So that's too technical. But for the other projects that you must involve the citizens, for instance, I'm thinking about the development of the plans. The CITA is not the project itself, but at least is the how you structure the vision of the island in the future. We must gather the citizens, we must gather the households and explain them and ask them what is their view on the projects that we are developing. Because as was mentioned here, it's easy to have people against the projects and in favor of the project. So we need to bring them to the same table and explain them the why and not so much the what, as was said here in the morning. So we need to explain them this. But for those are specific activities of awareness raising or citizen engagement. So those types of activities. I see more projects nowadays using this approach, because one thing that I think that we have been learning through time is that technology doesn't solve everything. So technology is there, is available, but if you don't involve the stakeholders, and those are at the end of the day, the islanders, the people that live there, if you don't involve them, you will not have success in the project. So you need to involve them. You need to also have a part of the project, a part of the finance, for instance, should be allocated for awareness raising.
Yeah, again, totally agree. We saw also some very good projects which were at the end like stopped because people were not in favor of the development, for example. Very technically feasible projects, also from the financial side, the resources were there, everything was okay, they were ready to start, but then since social acceptance was very low, they decided to give up on a very good project, which indeed is a pity. And also in NESOI we had many projects asking our technical assistance also, not mainly, but also to involve the citizens, so the final stakeholders, and is also a key element indeed. Then on the capacity building, as NESOI, what we try to do is to share the experiences of the islands for the islands. So not only for those who actually could benefit from our support, but also for the community of the islands who maybe applied but couldn't be funded, for example, and also for the others. So we are creating also digital platform to share experiences, best practices, and yeah, tomorrow colleagues will present also the experiences that we made with the short study tours. So we create like this kind of a small environment where people can discuss about their own experience. And again, this is a capacity building, so that's another opportunity.
I will cover more. Okay. you still have time for another question. Let's move to.
May I? Thank you. My name is Francesco from Green the Islands, and this is a quick reflection and a question building, to be honest, on the previous session about grids, but it blends well here. If I'm able to make it clear, I'm not sure. And also, I would lean on the previous colleagues' intervention, specifically on state-backed PPAs and market distortion. So working with seeds, just to go outside Europe for a second, it is clear, I think now, that they actually are making clear that the present financing mechanisms are not enough, and there is not enough or quick enough progress on adaptation and mitigation. We still don't know how this loss and damage fund will be implemented. We wait to see at COP28. And we also know now that extreme weather events are becoming more tougher and more severe and more frequent. So what I wanted to ask is, I know maybe it's tough to answer, it's tough even to ask, but in the financial world, are we really accounting for climate change? Even also, as you mentioned, 2030 is maybe behind the corner. And this maybe relates more to public-private cooperation, because I keep hearing, working with islands and hearing from you, projects, they need to be bankable. For certain projects, you need scale. But huge benefits can come from also smaller projects. And as our colleague said before, on islands it's often the case. So just to make an example, we were talking about grids before. Distributed generation and smaller grids, especially in seeds, are an amazing adaptation tool, and to provide the continuity of energy supply and other things. But also, if we think about water scarcity, and you can quickly relate to renewable desalination and things like this. So our financial mechanism, financial models accounting for this? And it was your point actually on the slide that at a certain point I saw finally today this word climate risk, right? But what about the benefits on the climate change side? Are we really accounting for them? I hope I was clear. Sorry if I was not.
No, I think that you were clear, or at least I understood something. Yeah, I'm not sure if I will answer to your question, but actually we put the climate risks as a risk in the due diligence process here on the work that we have done in the islands and other works that we are doing in other types of projects, because we know that storms are stronger, we know that there will be scarcity of water, so we know a lot of things that are changing and they could affect my project. So we need to put that. And whether are we answering or not, or the industry is answering or not, it's easy to answer, because the industry is looking at all the levels, because these projects usually they have insurance on the back of it, because the investor will ask, okay, I have to insurance this and these risks, so you have to cover that. And the insurance industry is the best in the world to cover these topics. But you ask two side questions. This is the worst part, that it will cost you more money. So we are thinking about whether there are benefits from climate change. That's a tricky one to answer. I don't see a lot of benefits coming from climate change. I see a lot of costs coming from there. But
no, of course, I meant benefits for the people, the beneficiaries for the projects.
Yeah, so I work for in climate finance, mainly in seeds with the GCF, World Bank, EBRD, so on and so on. So the climate financing is pushing, and it's coming to, and it's what I was showing, like within 5-10 years with the bonds and the taxonomy. And in part of the taxonomy that we are building, not the EU taxonomy, some that are working outside, but the EU will come. I don't know so much the EU. There is some adaptation. And when you are part of and when you do the adaptation, you enter in the taxonomy, so you can do like green bonds or blue bonds or adaptation bonds, maybe they will come soon. So the financing like market and system and mechanism is adapting, but it takes a little bit of time. It's like the regulation, it's the same thing. We see the effect, they need to react. They do not react. They might react faster sometimes than the government, but they are bound with some regulation. So, but it will come. In Europe, I don't know how it works. I know that EBRD outside of Europe is working a lot with the GCF and have this big loan and financing mechanism in many countries dealing with adaptation in seeds. EIB has, so EIB has it in Europe. So it's kind of working, and the big climate financing like loss and damage or GCF or CTF or CEFE, I mean, there is so many, it's crazy. They put money to reduce the interest rates and to give like capacity building, awareness raising, and all these other things that you need to have a full project developed, because you don't need money, you need money to do actions that are not only like technological action. You need a lot of money to develop the project, to take the hand of the people, to explain to them, to maintain, to so on. So I mean, it's coming. It might be too slow for some people, but it's coming. Yeah.
Okay, thank you. If I may, just to quickly.
Okay, because we have to. No, just if you want to do a reflection, a last reflection, and then we move to Maya.
May I?
Yes.
Just quickly, just to clarify, well, before I seem crazy, I was meaning that there is a climate risk for the project developer, but are we accounting for the benefits the project creates for people's livelihood in the adaptation? That was what I meant. Anyway, thank you for your question, and I just wanted to flag something, because we were talking about funding and financing mechanism in Italy. Because sometimes I don't even know if projects account for this, but many islands in Italy, but I know also in Spain and in Greece is the same, the state has to subsidize the energy cost generation in islands. Yeah. So for instance, in Italy, I think this is interesting, there's a decree, it's called the Minor Island Decree, and it aims at redirecting already allocated funds to cover the cost for provisioning diesel to the small islands not interconnected towards financing renewable energy projects. I think this is maybe a nice idea and can be replicated, but probably on the public-private cooperation we should do more. Thank you.
Okay. Fully agreed. No, Maya.
My name is Maya from Croatia Island Movement Organization, and we were actually active in funding, financing and capacity building. So I can speak from two different angles. One angle is that unfortunately there is constantly the lack of financing of the capacity building, and we are looking at the energy transition and renewables very much into the technical and investment point rather than thinking about the end beneficiaries. And it took us a lot of lobbying and a lot of years for getting, for the example in Croatia, for the Fund of Environmental Protection, for get the first tender only for the capacity building. And of course, at the end, it was also a very small amount of the money. And I personally think that whoever is making the tenders, especially public tenders, should have this part as a must activity within any kind of the projects, because even if you are doing a technical support with the hydrogen, at some point you need to start today to be able to have beneficiaries in 10 or 20 years who are going to drive a car on the hydrogen or use the ferry on the hydrogen. So this is something that I think that each of the public tender has to have into the mind, that, for example, someone who is applying should have incorporated into any kind of the tender the part of the capacity building on the local level, even if it's only one webinar, or because it's very important and it doesn't take so much amount of the investment. The other thing that I can say from our experience in Croatia is that we now see, for example, Croatia now has like integration territorial strategies only aimed for the islands, and there is quite some big amount envelope, financial envelope only for the islands. But what we did is actually we have now the 4 different categories where you can apply, and the energy transition is a 4th. And when you come to the islands, the need of the islanders is mostly not exclusively energy transition or renewables, because we don't understand it like this. But we understand it that we need better medical services, that we need less cost when it comes to the kindergarten, schools, public services, transportation, and everything else. And then you have mayors or people who are working in the public authorities who are putting the energy transition and renewables into the 4th box. So, for example, we have a, I don't know, renovation of the fire station, fire building, but we are not thinking about energy efficiency because we are not thinking about buying an electrical vehicle because this is energy transition box. So this is what actually whoever is working in renewable energy islands or any kind that we are now also, this conference is very focused on the renewables as such, and we should think about being incorporated into how to incorporate energy transition cultural activities, how to incorporate it into the transportation, how into the agriculture, because these are the points that are politically very important in the islands. And energy transition is something, first of all, we are all afraid because we don't understand it enough, and 4 years of political mandate is not enough to bring some kind of benefits, and then we are afraid. I'm talking like we as islanders, as someone who needs to bring a decision on local level how we'll spend the money and what tender they are going to apply. And the results currently for this mapping of the projects on the islands in Croatia is showing that we have a over need in a cultural and agricultural projects, and we have a lack of projects in the energy transition. So actually we are now trying to change it, that the energy transition and the projects in the energy transitions are going horizontally, which is actually logical. Because then you will have you can get the points. You should get better points to get the money if you are including energy transition, energy efficiency into all the projects that are going. Because every project on the island, no matter are we talking about building a street or a road with the, I don't know, car, how to say it, Punion, it's like where you are going to put your electrical car or having a bike a lane or something like this. So every project on the island or whenever can have actually the point of including energy transition into that. And this is how I think the financial future should think about it, because like now we are putting it aside and we are confusing the people who are not energy experts actually.
Personally, I fully agree with what you said, everything. And just to note that here, the taxonomy can play a role. Because actually the taxonomy covers 6 topics. For instance, biodiversity. So it covers different topics. And all the projects must cover them. So it's just a matter of also connecting those projects that do not seem energy efficiency or energy transition or whatever name we want to give them, link them with the taxonomy. They will have to follow the criteria that is there on the taxonomy regarding energy efficiency also. So it's a good way of pushing those projects towards this, but I agree with you, if you give extra points, if the fire station or the headquarters is more efficient, so they will put it there because they will get extra points. No, I agree that I know.
Just one comment before. We were also thinking, for example, now European Commission actually helped us a lot when they said, okay, you need to include the community into the big projects and infrastructure projects, wind farms and everything. But what we have now in the practical side is that the investors actually are engaging PR agencies to show that they included the local communities. But if we're thinking differently, and we are now again trying to start a pilot project of creating energy fund within the regional, for example, regional counters, where by the law investors should be obliged not to decide how they are going, not them to decide how they are going to help the local communities, but to get the part, like obliged part of the investment and the profit to the counters who are going actually with that money renovate the public buildings, because this is where the lack of money is actually. So we are now trying to find how to bridge the lack of money within the local authorities with the profit that is actually going to happen from the investors. So if we give them too much of the, let's say, freedom of how to manage the profit and the money, both of them, like the councils and the investors, then again we will not, I think, reach the goals. So this is again something that we can maybe think about it, of having this as obliging them to give the money that is going specifically going into the energy transition. So not that we can follow. The profit is going, the profit for the big projects is going to finance the especially public buildings, because we are all impacted by non-officially public buildings.
Regarding public building, ESCO can play a huge role. Energy efficient, energy contracting, energy performance contracting can play a big role because it's internalized and it's a guarantee saving, and so you just repay the project by the saving, and it's directly embedded in the budget of the municipality or of the council or something. So there is instrument existing that can, like, not obliged, because in financing we don't like so much the obligation thing, I think, and neither anywhere, because we don't want to oblige people. We want to, like, make them aware of the benefits and make them do the right thing because it's good for them. So yeah, there is mechanism to do this.
Thank you. I wanted to touch up of another issue, but since not to break the theme, I would probably catch up on what you told. I mean, speaking from the European Commission perspective and DG Energy perspective, I must admit, but we are also not the best place to be the ones who bring the discussion at the cultural and, let's say, broad policy and politics level and local politics level. This is why it's subsidiarity, and this is the reason why we do something at the EU, which we are kind of delegated to do, but we are trying not to interfere what the mayor of Saaremaa needs to do with his population. Having said that, we really try to do the rules, meaning exactly what you said. If we are dealing with taxonomy, if we are dealing with the, for example, obligatory renovation of public buildings, a certain percentage per year, this is to help local and other communities that, you know, this is something we are looking for, and we are kind of nicely pushing for it. And of course, then we also kind of decide or try to do the horizontal policies on the incentives. With this initiative, which is started there, and I must agree, it's energy focused, but from the beginning, from 5 years, we are moving more and more, not on the sources of energy, which is important part, but also on the use of energy. And that's why you see today there was a discussion on transport and ferries, which would be for, you know, my colleagues in DG Energy saying it's not our business, you know, leave it to DG Move. But we understand that when we go to work either with islands or the same as with cities and towns, we cannot talk about energy as such, you know, how much, you know, only the target of renewables and that's it. No, we need to see where we use it, how we use it, and what is the demand and what we can bring. And I'm just giving the one example, because that was when we saw the video, it was, of course, not to exclude anyone, it was the videos on island, it was selected parts from different. But one of the videos was speaking very well about to see how the energy changes the life of mayor, in that sense that, for example, the shop owner comes and says that I can keep my prices low because my bills of energy are much lower now. Or we have the doctor speaking, saying that with, you know, different approach of energy and 5G on one island, I have the doctor who is now on real time listening to the heart of the patient in Athens, and it helps the island doctor to actually make better diagnosis. So, I mean, those all things are interconnected. I'm not, you know, we try to go a bit that direction, but we need your all help, because the thing you know, you can deal with your politicians, you are electing them, and you can set their agenda, and you can also say, but look, you know, for us, it's very important to have this clean energy because it's changing our life in all sectors. I mean, from Brussels, we cannot put the finger and say, this is, you know, you see, this is important for you, or this should be important for you, it's even worse. No, we are trying to listen, to hear, and to try to build it into our policies. And maybe a last word on funding and financing. Again, I would say, for me, it's important to hear those things, although probably some of them I don't hear for the first time, because I'm also coming with my background from the DG Regio and structural funds I've done for 4 or 5 years. So now I am a bit even lost between two camps, because in DG Regio we always said, okay, we have so much money, and we have every year to decommit kind of quite reasonable amounts depending on country, because it was not invested, because there were not enough of projects to be invested. And we have different sectors struggling. In listening here and coming in island sector and town sector, it's, okay, we have lots of ideas, we have lots of, you know, needs, but, you know, there is no money. And I think both are right, what we say, but we have a gap. We have a gap, and the gap consists of two things. One thing is that in order to have a good project, as we discussed, and a kind of, I don't know, even the simple solar PV community project, there is a huge work to reach it in terms of, you know, convincing the community, creating the community, doing whatever pre-feasibility, feasibility, what NESOI does, what we do a bit with the Island Secretariat. But we are filling in very, very small kind of niche and gap with, you know, piloting islands or piloting cities. But overall, this gap is there. The capacity and technical assistance to really have mature projects, and whether they go for funding or for financing. And the second big gap is, and we are trying to kind of show to our colleagues both on Regio side but also in energy, small or this kind of small investment envelopes. I mean, none of the programs currently, and well, I leave banks aside, I mean, because that's different, but even none of the programs EU covers, when you need, for example, 100,000 euros for investment, I don't speak millions here. You know, there is a small community in Ireland, they need, I don't know, with 70,000 they can do a lot, and no one would cover it. So, you know, we are trying to see where we can. And of course, this should be easy, because, you know, for 70,000 euros, you will not employ the accountant for 50,000 to do it. So that's why I'm kind of taking it. We are working on it. But I think, you know, it takes us all, because it's also two sides. We need because of course, especially EU funds, it's shared management, meaning Commission does big agreements with the member states, but member states are implementing. So, you know, we also need the feedback from the beneficiaries, which would say, yeah, but this is what our problems are. This is why, and we heard it with Croatia, especially in our regulatory study, with very concrete examples why actually they don't reach to those funds or why they cannot take them, although the government was saying, yeah, but like you have this envelope and why you're not using it. So I think the more we can have very practical and concrete examples of what doesn't work, or what, on the contrary, what you would need to be able to access those funding, the easier for us is to push it to the policies. So I stop it there.
Okay, so this was the best way to end up our session. We did not agree on this approach, but thank you for attending our session and give this final view. I think that this will be helpful also for the rapporteur. We have a long work to do. I see. It was. I thought it would be an easy session, but it was not an easy session. But this is good because there was a lot of interaction. That was the idea. I would now suggest that we move. I think that we should leave for a moment, at least to get some air. And yeah, we will be available for any questions that you might have or something that we did not answer. Just go and talk with one of us. And thank you for attending the session.
And please, for the island, just apply to the call because Jorge and I will be really happy to support you in financing your project within the next years.